Good evening. My name is Jim Garrock, and welcome to the 4th edition of Chicago's War on Drugs. Today is April 25th, 2017. For those of you who are tired of the killing and shooting in Chicago, stay tuned. Instead of just accepting drug prohibition and the gang violence that inherently comes with it, on this show we will challenge the status quo. Tired of the endless and worsening drug overdose news? Fentanyl secreted in unlabeled street drugs? Patients turned into addicts? Stay tuned. Instead of accepting the consequences of unlabeled drugs and criminalized drug use, on this show we challenge conventional thought. During this 13-week series, we ask everyone to think and ask themselves, which is worse, drugs or the war on drugs? There is no right or wrong answer on this show. This is simply an important heart-to-heart discussion as regarding drug prohibition. This 13-week series is brought to you courtesy of Azteca Baseball League. And you see the website address and the phone number. And you can also reach us at drugnews1 at yahoo.com. This is a call-in show, so that if the discussion inspires you to pick up the phone and say we're wrong or right, we invite the call. The phone number is on the screen. Azteca Baseball League, 312-738-1060. So let's play ball. Tonight, I have with us, Greg Xanis, who's famous really in many parts of the United States because he's taken upon himself to try to help people who have suffered from violence, drug war violence, prohibition violence, indiscriminate, crazy violence, with crosses for losses. And I want to welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Jim. Normally we get
all right. Okay. Well, Chicago needs help, and we have Chicago in front of us. So we let's talk a little bit about what you do in Crosses for Losses. Last year, Chicago suffered 780 homicides, and you made 780 crosses. Am I correct?
That's right, Jim.
Tell our viewers about that.
Well, I got a free lumber donation, so I decided to make crosses for everybody that got murdered in 2016, and had the opportunity to walk those down Michigan Avenue with families and friends of lost loved ones. And there's a really good private video of that called ARM Greg Xanis, where you'll see me hugging these moms and dads and mothers, and telling me, you know, if he just wouldn't have hung around the wrong crowd, if he wouldn't have gotten involved with that group, he'd still be here today. So yeah, Jim, I'm a little bit of a Christian guy. I want people to go to church. But can I talk about what we were talking about, me and you?
Sure.
There's two things that really stuck out. One is the last few years we've had a 50% increase, or, you know, depends how you put the numbers, from 500 to 700 increase in Chicago. That's ridiculous. And the police say, oh, that's unacceptable. Well, you know, the next thing you told me is the reason I'm here on your show, is you told me that it would drop murder rate down significantly. I asked you to, again, like we said on the, I said to you, would it drop it down 10%? What's your answer to that? I mean, let's. The reason I'm here is I want to see crime stop.
I think that if we ended prohibition in Chicago and America, the murder rate would drop in half.
Did you hear that? In half. In half? Are you kidding? I never heard anybody say that before.
So,
I mean, people are skirting around it, Jim, when you say that, and you come with authority. You know, I'm just a carpenter. In half? Are you talking about Chicago or the whole country, buddy? I mean, you know, you'd be the most hugged guy in the world if you could.
You know, we put in place a war on drugs in the United States because drugs are bad, and we want to protect kids from drugs. And so we thought the intuitive thing, well, let's prohibit drugs.
When you say war, this is what is going on in Chicago. It's a war zone. You're talking about 700 people got killed. 50% of them are drug related. Oh my gosh.
Well,
actually,
actually,
we're losing the war because we're losing our kids.
Our former superintendent, Gary McCarthy, said that 80% of the homicides in Chicago are gangs fighting over drug turf.
80%.
And why is the drug turf so valuable? Because when you outlaw drugs and people want them, now the price of drugs goes through the ceiling. So
now, I know I was talking to you on the phone, but in Colorado, the homicide rate has slowed down in Denver. You know, I'm not the statistician like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But 80%, is that what you said? He said? This is
the former superintendent said 80%.
Okay, what's going on here? You guys are trying to oppress your own people. The Bible says, you know, in Genesis, whatever I put here, and I looked at it and I made it, meaning God, he said, and it was good.
Mm-hmm.
And now we got laws that say it's bad. I don't get it. I mean, let's get back to the first book of the Bible. I don't want to preach to you. I want to teach you, okay?
Sure.
But, oh my gosh. We're supposed to follow our government, Christians. Don't get, I'm not an anarchist here.
Well, we welcome all views and faiths and some that are not so strong. And but the wedding of Canaan, supposedly they ran out of wine. And they got help from this fella in a white garment and made the best wine. And the tradition was that you would use the best wine at the wedding feast first. Right. And everybody wanted to know why was the best wine at the end of the feast. So now some people may argue that it was non-alcoholic grapes. But I didn't know if they invented those that many
centuries
ago.
First off, they drank it because they couldn't drink the water. You get sick from the water. You had to have alcohol in there. Come on,
that's why they drink so much wine in Italy.
A little Socrates here.
Yeah. Well, anyway, what we have done is decided we're going to take some of God's plants and we're going to outlaw them. We're going to outlaw the poppy plant. We got soldiers marching through the poppy fields. We're going to outlaw marijuana, which grows in the ditch like dandelions. And as we speak of dandelions, we might as well outlaw dandelions. We won't have to pay.
I mean, first off, you're two-faced over there. Not you, but the government's saying outlaw. But in Vietnam, everybody got stoned. They never came back. I mean, what are you talking about? They say it's against the law in Vietnam, but everybody does. What is going on here? What are the stats here?
The people, there were soldiers in the Vietnam War who started using drugs, and they had good reason because people were shooting at them. Now, maybe that's part of the driving force for drug use in Chicago because people are certainly being shot at. What we need to do is consider drug policy reform, changing the rules. So that it's not more advantageous for a kid to drop out of school, join a gang, get a gun, and try and make unlimited money in this crazy war on drugs. It's not easy, though, to go to the public and say that.
I understand you've never used in your life before.
That's correct.
I mean, I have. Let's qualify.
I've imbibed in alcohol.
What I'm saying is, look, if I'm in a stressful situation and I know I'm never going to own a piece of property and all that, why can't I relieve my stress? I see you don't understand marijuana at all, so I'm just saying. Okay, well, let's laugh at it, but I'm saying.
I agree.
There's nothing else to do all day long. That's all. There's nothing else to do. I mean, if one solution is bringing in jobs, that's cost hundreds of billions of dollars. That's not right there, but changing the law is right there.
See, there's so many people in Chicago that are complaining about the people selling drugs down at the corner. And so they could pick up the phone and say, there's people selling drugs down at the corner, and call the police. And the police can come out and they can haul the people away. But there are going to be more people coming back there. Instead of calling the police department, they could call the mayor and say, we want to end drug prohibition so that these kids, instead of selling it on the street, end up with licensed proprietors selling drugs under controlled, regulated circumstances with labels so people knew what they were consuming and not overdosing and killing themselves. In the four-county area of Cook County, Lake County, here's a picture overhead. In 2016, the opiate dose in Lake County were 59 people killed. In DuPage, 107 overdoses. In Cook County, 729 overdoses. And in Will County, 96. Why are so many people overdosing from opioids? Well, one of the biggest reasons is because they are consuming unregulated drugs, where the person who's selling the drugs does not know what's in it.
Yeah.
So it's, we have a call from probably God that's unexpected. But in any event, it's intolerable to have 991 people being killed because we have unlabeled, prohibited drugs. You know, when I was a prosecutor in Chicago in the early 70s, the best heroin was 2% pure. And they called it Mexican mud because it was this black tar stuff. It looked terrible.
Let me go a different direction.
Well, and let me just finish.
Okay,
so then we jump forward 40-some years. Now, instead of this 2% heroin, we have 90% pure heroin.
Wow.
Everywhere across the United States.
You're kidding. It's like
and the suburbs are suffering the same brunt of the opioid crisis, the fentanyl-laced drugs that we have everywhere else. Now, I interrupted you.
Not to sound offensive, but at one point, you're fighting us, the drug users, the guy that's not, the recreational guy that's growing his own, right?
The United Nations says that 3.5% to 7% of the population of the world use drugs for recreational purpose, which means roughly 200 to 350 million people worldwide use drugs illegally. Worldwide, the prison population is 10 million. If we're going to try and lock up all these people who choose to use substances to alter their mental consciousness, we won't have any money left for anything except prisons. So we obviously have to do something better. And why not control and regulate substances, for example, like we did alcohol? Now, some drugs are more dangerous than alcohol, arguably, but alcohol and tobacco kills more people than... It's such an infinitesimal amount of people that die from heroin, cocaine, meth, and so forth,
really?
Compared to who dies from alcohol and who dies from cigarettes. So we need to be careful in the rules we put in place to replace prohibition. But we know prohibition is a killer. Yeah. We know that your streets are going to be unsafe if prohibition is in place. And my streets, which are the same streets, are unsafe.
Okay. Well, Jim, you have the numbers. We were talking about GNP, gross national product of our nation, and how when people buy drugs that are bought from another nation, that's money we never see back. That's you probably know how much it is. It's got to be in the billions of dollars. How can we not have a regenerative society here in America on the same product would immediately stop if it was legalized? That money would go back into our own communities here in Chicago.
Sure. It's estimated that worldwide the illegal drug trade is $500 billion a year. Here we have a I pushed the wrong button. Here we have the National Drug Threat Assessment from 2011, which was prepared by the U.S. Department of Justice, National Drug Intelligence. And at page 29 of this report, it says that Mexico produces 21,500 metric tons of marijuana a year. And this was from 2008. Now we've legalized marijuana in some states, so the economic harm to the drug.
So we've been drained of $1 trillion on this drug thing. We've been drained of money that's never going to come back to our country to help build our own country.
We have a whopping trade imbalance because U.S. dollars goes to Mexico to buy their marijuana when we could grow our own.
We could.
And I'm not advocating, and I'm sure you're not, that people use substances. But it's important for people to decide not to use drugs rather than the government ordering them not to use drugs because it doesn't work. The evidence that it doesn't work just abounds. We seized 8 tons of marijuana, and we thought it was a big drug bust. Well, I guess it's big unless you know that there's 21,000 tons
more of that.
That it makes 8 tons insignificant. So, I know if the people in Chicago want to do something about the violence, then you have to ask yourself, should I be in favor of this war on drugs or should I be against the war on drugs?
Yeah.
It is the war on drugs which is the mother of all harms. The problem with guns, gangs, crime, prisons, the infection rate with AIDS, with people using dirty needles because we don't want to send a wrong message by allowing people to have clean needles. We have the excessive use of police force. We have the militarization of the police department. We have the police, instead of assigned to solve homicide cases, where our homicide cure rate here in Chicago, I'm going to go back to my website here, they have an estimate of the homicide clearance rate from 2010 to 2016 in Chicago fell to 26%. So that means 3/4 of the people who kill someone in Chicago end up not being caught. And what are the police doing instead?
What percentage? What percentage?
26%.
Do not get caught.
26% get solved. The case gets solved in 26 instances. So 3/4 of the time it does not.
Jim.
Now, and then let me tell you this. On the shootings, we've got in 2016, the chance of getting caught was 5% for a shooting case in Chicago. So 95% of the people who commit a shooting in Chicago go scot-free. Why do we deploy so many police to set up surveillance and do these complicated investigations to see what adult is voluntarily selling drugs to some other adult? It's sending the police on a wrong mission, a mission that doesn't accomplish its purpose.
Well, think of it from a non-educated person's point of view. They don't even make it to high school, right? They're thinking this is what's left. But they're also thinking 2 other things that go along with that. If they're selling drugs, they're using drugs at some point, and then at some point, it's a policeman that takes their drugs away. So they grow up when they're 10, 11, 12, not trusting that police guy. And we don't really have much rapport. People are not helping our guys in blue. They're just not helping us.
Well, I don't really blame the police. The police have been given this assignment of going out and finding the drug dealers, confiscating the drugs. And nobody has much sympathy for these drug users or drug sellers, so if they get roughed up a little bit, well, it's part of the business. But you can't restore community police relations and have a war on drugs.
So what's the violent, non-violent rate before we go, incarcerated right now? See, you understand what I mean? What percentage of people are in there for drug or drug-related crimes, and what are the rest of them in there for strong-arm robbery and real felonies,
The federal prison system is basically 63% in prison for drugs.
You're kidding? Why are we throwing all that money away?
The state prison system countrywide is like 25% of the people in state prisons.
I've been going to church and I don't know this stuff. See, that's what it is. I'm up there all the time. That's my big show for the week.
Well, they should make
and
make
I
these,
just don't see what's going on outside.
They should make these announcements before they do the collections. The collections would go up.
They have no problem raising money. Careful. Okay, we're almost.
Well, we have a few minutes left here. If we got a caller, we've got 5 minutes. Let me show our viewers. This is the. Oh my goodness, this is heavy. This is the cross that you make and send to places where they've had all these homicides. Yeah. 780 in Chicago last year, and it's heartwarming that you do that because goodness knows. Homicide is one of the most horrible things that can happen to someone. Now, you always make things for other people, so in honor of today's visit, I thought I would make you something. And what we have here is a little tombstone.
I know you're not a hugger.
and folks, take a look at this.
Make a hugger out of him, yeah.
My producer and I made this for this show, and you'll see that it says Chicago's War on Drugs. And how do people die because of this war on drugs? They die from overdose and GSW. They die from gunshot wounds. And there are little holes you'll see in this wood, which look like bullet holes, but actually they're nail holes because this wood came from a float that was in the Bud Billiken Day Parade. And you'll see the float on TV, and the float that had a big drug war cloud at the top with a rainbow pouring money into the pot of gold, which is what the war on drugs does in many communities because it's like manna from heaven pouring money into the community. But the problem is it's also the killer. It's what kills so many people. So we need to end this war on drugs, and I hope you enjoy this memento.
Well, thank you.
And there is our tombstone memorializing your appearance on Chicago's War on Drugs. Now, we had a caller here a moment ago. I don't know if we've still got him or if we have time. I think we have time. Do we have a caller?
Yes, good evening. I have a very quick comment. I know you're wrapping up. It's good to hear that you don't advocate people using, substance abuse, but you could really end this if they reinstated the death penalty and you hung, and I'm dead serious, you take a drug usage serious like they do down in the Philippines, and you hung 4 convicted drug kingpins, people who sell the narcotics, you put a big dent into it. But until you come down hard on that, you're still going to have your people that are controlled by greed trying to sell that. And I think it has to be taken seriously. And I'd like to see that implemented. Thank you.
Okay. Well, could you hear the question?
No, I didn't.
Our caller had suggested why not implement the death penalty so that we really get tough and these kingpins, we execute them. Well, the difficulty with that is there's always another kingpin waiting. We had Al Capone, who was a big guy. We had Pablo Escobar, who was a big guy. We have now El Chapo Guzman. Right now, the murder rate in Mexico has dramatically increased because they're trying to figure out who's going to take over the drug business in Mexico. I was asked a question like that in 1992 when I was running for state's attorney of Cook County. And I answered the questioner by saying, well, the suggestion was, why don't we cut their hands off? And I said, it's a good suggestion, but what do you do with all the hands? And if we start killing people because they're dealing or using drugs, we're going to end up like Duterte in the Philippines, where people are being killed by vigilantes in the street. And the United Nations is imploring the reinstitution of human rights and human decency. So I want to again appreciate you for coming. We have to wrap up now. Is there any other thought that you would like to leave with our listeners here today?
Well, I just want everybody to keep Chicago in your prayers and our nation too. And, Jim's real clear. There's more than one God. It depends on who your faith is, but what's going on here in Chicago, and Jim, you really enlightened me, and I just can't thank you enough for that. This is not the end of my conversation about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And folks, thank you for joining Chicago's War on Drugs. I'm Jim Gierach. Thank you for being with us.